By now, I suppose, anyone who pays enough attention to politics to listen to a podcast like this one has heard about the Sharpie meeting. The meeting where the president went off on a 5-minute tangent about $5 Sharpie pens that he had made. There are videos all over social media about this event. You should really check it out if you haven't seen it already. But this meeting, where he digressed about the relative merits of his favorite permanent markers, wasn't just any meeting. This was a cabinet meeting. The agenda of the meeting should have included topics like the ongoing war, counterintelligence, current economic fallout. The Secretary of Defense was there. We assume ready to brief. The Secretary of State had, I'm sure, updates to give to the president. Treasury, in all likelihood, is tracking global markets reacting to the instability in the Middle East. The importance of these items is not theoretical. It's immediate. Now imagine, before any of that really gets going, the President of the United States leans in and starts telling a story about Sharpies. Not a quick aside, not a joke, a full story with numbers and details, with a narrative arc where he is a hero who saved the government money. 5 minutes. 5 minutes about markers. Now, that's enough in and of itself, but in the aftermath of this meeting, a meeting that was recorded, by the way, the press reaches out to the folks at Sharpie. Their response to this story, the one so important that it needed to be presented to the cabinet, we have no idea what he's talking about. Now, this is not satire. This is not an SNL sketch, as much as I wish it were. That's what actually happened. And it was not the only tangent, or as Trump likes to refer to them, the only weave that he went off on during this meeting. So today I want to talk about what it means when the most important meeting in government stops being about information and starts being about weaves. Greetings to all, and welcome to Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast where we talk about progressive politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis. I am your host. And today we're going to be talking about the now infamous Sharpie meeting. This is just my name for it because in a meeting filled with odd topics, the little speech about Sharpie markers was by far the strangest. So let's jump right in and ground ourselves first, because without that, none of this hits quite the way it should. A cabinet meeting is one of the most important operational tools that a president has. It's not ceremonial, it is functional, or it's supposed to be. It exists for a very specific reason, or set of reasons. To bring the most informed people in the government into the room. To present the most current, accurate information available to the president, and then to allow the president to make decisions based on that information. Think of it like a control center. Each cabinet member represents a domain. Defense is military reality. State is diplomatic reality. Treasury, economic fallout. Homeland security, domestic risks. So on and so on. Each one brings a piece of the puzzle. And then the president's job is to listen, clarify, and decide. It's really not to dominate the conversation. It's not to perform. It's not to give a monologue. It's mostly to listen. Now, if you layer in the timing as well, this was not a slow news week. This meeting happened while U.S. and Israel military are attacking Iran, and those related tensions are escalating. Global oil markets are reacting. Domestic infrastructure and security issues are in play. This is the kind of moment where missing one detail can matter. Misunderstanding one report can matter. And interrupting one briefing can matter. Because decisions cascade, particularly at this level. And when the system works properly, those decisions are built on a foundation of shared, accurate information. But that only works if the room stays focused. So let's walk through what actually happened, because this is where it stops being abstract. We're not talking about tone. We're talking about sequence and events. From reporting across multiple outlets, a pattern emerges. The meeting starts as expected. Cabinet members begin to brief. There are references to Iran's actions, military posture, intelligence assessments. This is the core material. This is the reason why everyone is there. And then the interruptions begin. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but persistent. The kind of interruptions that shift the tension. Comment here, a joke there, an aside, then a pivot. And suddenly, we're not talking about Iran anymore. We're talking about something else. And this is where the weave comes in. Because instead of topic, discussion, conclusion, you get topic, aside, story, joke, new topic, half return, new tangent. Now imagine trying to brief in that environment. You're the Secretary of Defense. You've got information that matters. But every time you try to land a point, the conversation moves. Not because anything's been resolved, just because it's been redirected. And that redirection adds up minute by minute, topic by topic, until eventually the meeting is no longer structured around information. It's structured around the president's train of thought. And that's a completely different system. So let's talk about the weave, because this isn't new. Trump has described his speaking style this way for years. The idea is that he moves between topics, connects ideas non-linearly, circles back to earlier points, and so on and so on. Now, supporters describe this as dynamic and engaging and unscripted authenticity. Some argue that this method works, well, at least in some circumstances. At rallies, I suppose. On television, I guess it depends on whether you care about why your clips go viral or not. Those environments are built for performance. They reward energy and spontaneity and unpredictability and much less authenticity. But here's the thing, and it's a thing the president has struggled with from day one. Governance is not a rally. When you're actually doing the job of president, it's not supposed to be about keeping attention and making sound bites or showing off. It's supposed to be about maintaining clarity, productivity, getting the job done. The weave in governance settings creates problems. It distracts from the tasks at hand. It breaks continuity. And continuity is everything when you're talking about a briefing. Because complex issues require sustained attention, linear explanations, cumulative understanding. You can't assess a military situation in disconnected fragments. You can't evaluate something as dense as economic risk if it's in scattered pieces. You need the full picture, in order, connected. So when the weave enters that space, it doesn't enhance the process, it disrupts it. And that's exactly what we saw in this meeting. Press reports contend that somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of that meeting was taken up by Trump talking. That is not the president getting briefed. That's just Trump yammering to a captive audience, his favorite kind. Now, let's zero in on the Sharpie story, because it was weird. I mean, it was damn weird. But weirdness may not be the most important issue. It was also revealing. At best, it reflects an unserious man in the most serious job. At worst, something far worse. So his claim on the Sharpies goes like this. The government was buying expensive pens. Yes, pens. Around $1,000 each, according to the president. He mentioned that many of them get given away. He even managed to mention that kids get some of these, and he insisted that kids don't know what pens are. And no, I'm not making that up. So, in his story, he steps in at this point. He replaces these expensive pens with Sharpies. Now, not just any Sharpies, all black Sharpies with gold lettering on, because, of course it would be gold. All this taken care of after his negotiations with the manufacturer to get these marvelous writing tools at only $5 a piece. Trump is the hero. He saves the taxpayers from the horrors of $1,000 pens, all by virtue of his influence and his deal-making prowess. It has the classic story structure. There's a problem. There's an intervention, and there's a resounding success. It's clean. It's flattering. It reinforces his identity as the guy who fixes waste. But then the other shoe drops, as it were. The press reaches out to the company, and the company says, this didn't happen. They have no record of the order or the fulfillment of any such order. No record of the deal. Nothing. So what we have is a story told with confidence, specificity, lots of detail that appears to have no factual basis in reality. And that, of course, raises a question. Why? Now, we're not asking why in the political sense. We're asking why in the cognitive sense. Because this isn't just, I did a great job, his usual bluster about how wonderful he is. This is a detailed example of a specific event or chain of events that literally did not happen. And that's where it starts to get interesting. There's a theory floating around. Now, not a diagnosis, not a confirmed condition, just a theory, but one that is as plausible as it is concerning. The theory is that some of what we're seeing could be consistent with something called frontotemporal dementia, or FTD. Now, again, I want to repeat before we go any further. There is no public medical information to confirm this. This is purely speculation being discussed in public discourse. We need to treat it as that, but we can talk about the concepts because they matter. Now, what is frontotemporal dementia? It's a neurological condition that affects behavior, decision-making, impulse control, and language. And one of the very common symptoms that can show up in patients with FTD is something called confabulation. Now, what is confabulation? Very importantly, confabulation is not lying. That's very, very important to make that distinction. We all know that Trump is to liars what Michael Jackson was to pop music. We've come to accept that as a given. But here's the difference. A person who is lying knows the truth and consciously chooses to say something false for whatever motivation they have to do so. But a person who is confabulating believes what they are saying. But the memory or story is inaccurate or, in some cases, entirely made up. It's a symptom of FTD where the brain tries to fill in gaps. Not to deceive, but to complete a narrative that feels real. Now, I'm guessing you're following me on this, but just in case, why does this matter here? Because the Sharpie story has a very specific shape. It's detailed, it's self-flattering, concrete, numbers, actions, outcomes, and according to the company involved in the story, it's unsupported by reality. That's exactly the kind of story that raises questions. That's exactly the type of tale you get with FTD and confabulation. Again, this is not proof, but I think we can all agree that this conversation is worth having. Now, whether it's intentional exaggeration, habitual lying, or something neurological, in a cabinet meeting, the effect is the same. But in the larger picture, we are looking at the possibility that decisions are being framed by information that may not be grounded in reality. That's the real issue here. Now, I want to step back a little bit, because even if you ignore everything we just discussed, there's another glaring contradiction here. I mean, besides the idea that Trump told a story that, as they say, was made from whole cloth. This other contradiction is that while once again touting himself as the money-saving guy, the guy who, in this case, saved the nation thousands of dollars on pens, we concurrently have ongoing reporting about a new ballroom at the White House, a UFC event that's going to be hosted on the White House grounds, billions of dollars going to things like the Board of Peace, military aircraft used for flyovers at Kid Rock's mansion. Yeah, look that one up. There's video of that one too. Trust me, it's a can't miss. Now let's be clear. Governments spend money on events and all sorts of unusual things. That's nothing new. But context matters. You don't get to elevate yourself for saving money on office supplies while embracing large public expenditures on arguably unnecessary things. That's also not reality. That's messaging and framing, and not particularly honest versions of either. There is a giant disconnect between what's being said and what's being done. And people who pay attention notice that. At least the people who don't drink the MAGA Kool-Aid notice that. This isn't just about one meeting. That's important because it's easy to dismiss one event as a bad day or an off moment or whatever. But when you zoom out, you start to see the pattern. The weave shows up repeatedly, almost constantly. The storytelling shows up repeatedly. The exaggerations show up repeatedly. And when those patterns move from campaign settings where we have sort of gotten used to the blather and into governance settings, the impact changes drastically. Because now they're not just rhetorical, they're operational. They affect how information flows, how decisions are made, how seriously discussions are taken. And that's the shift. We as a country are dealing with a good many very important things right now. Immigration issues, the war in Iran, voting rights under attack, just to name a few. I don't think I'm alone in believing that none of these issues lend themselves to lies and exaggerations, or perhaps confabulation. This has gone beyond just a personality trait that many people find nauseating. It's now become about function. A cabinet meeting is a tool. And like any tool, it only works if it's used correctly. If the structure breaks, then the output suffers. And in this case, the output is national decision making. When briefings are interrupted and topics are derailed and information is diluted or created out of thin air, the system weakens. And the consequences absolutely do not stay in that room. They ripple outward into policy and markets and global stability. That's why this matters. At the end of the day, this meeting will probably be remembered for one thing. Not Iran, not policy, not strategy. Sharpies. And that alone should tell you something. Because when the most important meeting in government is remembered for a story that isn't even real, that's not just strange. That's a signal, a warning signal. Something in the process isn't working the way that it's supposed to. And that is worth paying attention to. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to download and listen to this episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. Please reach out to the podcast. Let me know your thoughts on the Sharpie meeting. Let me know what you're thinking about the podcast. Questions, comments, critiques, whatever it is, I want to hear it. You can go to the website, www.neighborontheleft.com, and find the contacts page with all the social media links, as well as an email address, any of which you can use to contact the podcast. You can also find a web player where you can listen to or download any of the episodes of this podcast going all the way back to the beginning. And there is also a blog section on the website that includes posts that mirror the topics that I talk about in the podcast, and the blog posts include the sources that I use. So I'll be back on Friday with another episode of Back Porch Files from Your Neighbor on the Left. So between now and then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.